And a big welcome to our live audience for the Digital Health InvestorTalk show. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me on x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of fundraising with crowdfunding and competitions. As digital health retrenches and AI explodes, what are creative ways for entrepreneurs to raise money? This show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called Digital Health Investor Talk. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify. And we always love getting a review. So this is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of today's show. It's 90 minutes long, and Alex and I will spend the first part discussing the news and the macro picture and some other topics. And then in the second half of the show, we'll focus on our special topic of the day. And we'll be taking your questions throughout the show in the LinkedIn text chat. So Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here. It's great seeing you again. It's been great working with you for 8 years now, doing events and co-promoting and just helping out. I love the show. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so can you introduce yourself to our audience, and tell us about maybe some exposure you've had to crowdfunding and competitions?
Sure. And so my name is Alex Fair, says it on the screen. I started MedStartr.com, which also says it on the screen. So nice and easy. I don't have the prepared notes that you do, Steve, so this is just off the cuff. So I started as a scientist, doing cancer research, physics research, undergrad and grad school. But then I started a company, took off, bought in my 20s, became a CIO of a physician practice management company, which was really big in the 90s. Did consulting for a while, started an IT consultancy, and then Scanby, which connected cell phones and barcodes and QR codes. It was fun. But then took a hiatus from anything healthcare. It kind of started with Scanby, but then it came back. I retired from that 38, and I said, let me go back to healthcare and let me do something meaningful. So I go to I had an idea. Ideas can be dangerous. And I named it after myself. It was called Fair Care MD. And it was a price line for healthcare because I wanted to fix the health price transparency problem. It's like 2010. And I walked around New York City for 100 days. And I walked into 2,600 doctors' offices and I said, hi, my name is Alex P. Fair. Can we make your medical pricing fair for you and your patients? And so they'd either laugh at me or let me talk to the doctor. And so in about 100 days, we got about 100 doctors to list their prices on the platform. This is 2010. So I considered that period to be sort of an education of how not to build business models in healthcare. And so we go to crowdfund it. And even though Mike Pence, it's a different Mike Pence, my CTO, had been the original developer of Kickstarter, on a contract. He was the one who built Fair Care. So we go to put it on Kickstarter and we know the guys. And they said, no, sorry, we don't have anything to do with healthcare innovation. We don't want to get involved with the FDA. So no, sorry, you can't list Fair Care here. So I turned to Mike and I said, Mike, how long till we can have our own? And he said, well, I got one right here. And so we just changed the names, and MedStartr was born like a week later. And we put 2 projects on the site. And we learned the first important lesson of crowdfunding. And we were the first healthcare innovation focused crowdfunding site. This is 2012, right after the Jobs Act passed. And I had been running a community called Health 2.0 New York since Eugene Barakovich had taken off for the summer and asked me to run a few events. He never came back. I'm still running it 15 years later. So it's now called MedStartr.nyc because the Health 2.0 brand was sold to HIMSS. But we got up to like 218 chapters of the Health 2.0 local chapters. So that was a very fun, exciting experience. But I had a couple thousand people in New York meeting every month or so, talking about healthcare innovation. And we noticed back then that things would happen at those events. A engineer would meet a marketer. He had a pill bottle that would weigh the things in the pill. She wanted to sell it. And suddenly a company was formed. And it had helped me a lot when I was making Fair Care. So I was very appreciative. So I was happy to run the events. But then we launched the crowdfunding site and we put up 2 campaigns on the site initially. Fair Care, which is why we were really doing it, and one for MedStartr itself. And TechCrunch wrote about it, Economy, Business Insider. We got 70,000 visits in the first week. So it took off. It was like a rocket ship. But you don't know if it's a rocket ship or a ICBM. You don't know what's going to happen, right? So tons of people funded MedStartr, and only one person put money into Fair Care, and it was my cousin, so that doesn't even really count. So anyway, so that's how we got here. So that happened, and then a couple months after we started MedStartr, GE came to us and said, "Hey, why don't we use that crowdfunding thing as a way to validate which ideas are the best ones for us to invest in?" This was GE's Healthy Imagination Fund, $6 billion back then, and they were running contests, but not with the benefit of knowing what patients thought, what doctors thought. It wasn't, their judges, as they said, were the eggheads in the back room who had biases and things like that. And they wanted to unbias the contest. So we ran that first challenge. HHS wound up being the sponsor, ONC under Todd Park and Farzad Al-Shari. And went great. A company called Together, run by a woman named Michelle Longmire, won that first one. That company now is Medable, but her first money in came from our first crowd challenge. And the hits just kept coming with Unite Us, One Doc Way, Lurchy, Valera Health. And so the crowd challenges were an extremely good way to find companies that were going to rocket ship. But of course, you don't know that at first, right? Because you need at least 15 months or so after the contest to really see what would happen, right? Because what starts in a contest doesn't necessarily end there, and you can't necessarily count on that company being successful in the marketplace. But we ran the numbers after a couple of years, and with an average runtime of 15 months. And I knew nothing about venture capital at that time. I had started companies, I'd sold them privately. I've done a lot of M&A work, but I wasn't on that side of the table really. We did a young man that I was working with, so I was still doing the day job, had experience from Rodman Renshaw, and he explained, that if I had been investing, something called the IRR would have been somewhere between 187 and 244%. And I was like, "Is that good? And what's IRR?" So, and every investor I know who hears this story laughs right at that point. And so, yeah, so we started investing. It started, my first fund was just me, just my money. And after 18 months, the IRR was 199%. And so that was the basis for fund two, where me and 28 other people invested. And basically it's a large accelerator fund, and it's done pretty well over the last 6 years. So now we're doing the third fund. And it's a family of funds. We're doing, keeping it separate. In the past, we did 19 deals in 12 companies. And that was great. We did a lot of follow-ons, but it also mixed the returns. So that initial hockey stick like growth we would see after they won one of our contests would turn into a large hospital system coming in and borrowing all the staff and the IP, and us getting a 10x cram down out of it. And so we learned how to navigate such situations. So now we have a complete system that helps startups along the way, accelerates them at 3 different levels. It's a complete methodology to go from ideation through validation, which we do in the contests, into acceleration, all the way over to coordination and integration into the actual healthcare system at scale. The stage 3 accelerator we just figured out this last year, and that's pretty cool because we can get a company to grow 6x by partnering with large healthcare organizations, which, when we started, we were like, it's a revolution. We're going to change everything. We're going to mess this up. But now it's more of an evolution that, gradual working with partners to help the startups, because it's an ecosystem, right? So you have to be part of the system. So I guess in the last 15 years, we grew up a little bit. So
Yeah,
that might be a little too much information.
So I saw you had an article on your site about how it's from healthcare revolution to healthcare evolution. And I have a somewhat similar story I'm telling, which is I say that the term digital health is a transitional term that we're going to stop using eventually. And it's sort of like saying I have a smartphone or I have a cell phone. Well, today everyone has that. And so now it's just your phone. And similarly, digital health meant something when it was different people and when it was outside the system. Today, when every healthcare organization has tech people already inside, and there's few healthcare products that are not digital health, then it's just healthcare.
Yeah, no, I mean Cars were called horseless carriages once upon a time. Right? And I think we're going to do the same thing with AI. We don't think, I mean, when computerization came to industry, it was all like, oh, we're using computers and it's computerized this and computerized that. AI is going to be integrated into everything. 90% of the startups we see now have some sort of, AI element. And if they're not using AI, then they're probably not going to be around that much longer. And the same thing is true of venture funds, in my opinion.
Well, so our first segment of the show is macro news. We talk about any developments of the last week or two on the macro news front. And I remember when entrepreneurs were blissfully unaware of macro news because it was always good and they never had to know about the NASDAQ level. But today, unfortunately, that stuff comes knocking at your door. So one story today is that the NASDAQ is up. It's near all-time highs. It's at 21.6 thousand. And so that means 18 months ago, if all you'd done was put your money in the NASDAQ, you would have more than doubled it by now. And everyone would think you're a stock market genius. And I think people did not really expect the NASDAQ to be up so high. And there's concerns we might have a recession and that could cause a pull-in of stock prices. And the IPO window is definitely open. So it was closed for a few years and people were very concerned that but it opened. And today, a company called Bullish, which is a crypto exchange, floated today, and its shares doubled on IPO, and it raised $1.1 billion. And so that's a sign, clearly sign of the IPO window finally being open. And I think unexpectedly, the opening was led by digital health. Nobody thought that would happen. They thought big tech would lead the opening of the IPO window and digital health unicorns would follow afterwards when it was safe and proven. But instead, you had Omada and Hinge led the opening of the IPO window a few months ago. So
I mean, there was a lot of pent up demand there, Steve. I mean, we hadn't seen a health tech IPO, and certainly a successful one in years. So there was a lot of companies that had grown a lot, especially during COVID. If they survived the post COVID period, then which a lot didn't, as well as a lot of healthcare VC firms didn't. A company that grew out of the New York City health tech community, Startup Health, they're not investing anymore. And I was very surprised and disappointed. I hope they come back because I think Unity and Steve are really amazing. But yeah, so it's unfortunate, but it will come back, and it is coming back. I mean, slowly, but I think it will. I mean, there's just so much innovation out there. I would say that innovation has been accelerating, and as a rule, innovation does accelerate. But it's been accelerating even faster with the emergence of AI tools and AI builds and agents and everything. But let's go back to crypto for a second. I mean, Bitcoin's at 122,000. I mean, that's ridiculous. Wonderful, not wonderful. What do you think? Spot, are you interviewing me or am I interviewing you? Please, you are more current on the news, so it's better for me to ask you questions.
So, I think your right coin is at 122,000. And interestingly, so Bitcoin, and there's Bitcoin and then there's the rest of crypto. So with Bitcoin, it was supposed to prove out as being a good sort of medium of exchange. It has not proven to be that. It was supposed to be available to be chosen by third-party actors like BRICS nations. They chose to skip Bitcoin, not use it. It's ultimately a store of value. That's a disappointment. It was supposed to fill about 5 or 6 roles, and the role that it's filled is store of value. And as a store of value, it was supposed to be orthogonal to stock markets. So you put your money in Bitcoin, it's determined by other things, like gold is determined by other things, not by stock markets. It turns out that it just tracks the growthy part of the stock market. And so it's up today because the NASDAQ's up today. And so it would be more valuable if it was orthogonal to growth stocks, but instead it seems the same kind of person who likes high stock prices likes getting in Bitcoin at high prices. So I think it's a disappointment. And there's the rest of crypto, and that has been, sadly, really, I think, tarnished by scandal. Many projects tend to not work, and then many of the coins are subject to what's called rug pulls, and people are just, having seen so much of it, people are just leery of it. And finally, there's blockchain tech or Web 2.0 tech, and it has not really seen widespread uptake in digital health. I have it seems like centralized databases are what is efficient in healthcare. And that's blockchain is the opposite of that. So blockchain works if decentralization is your most important value as a user, but that's not people's most important value in healthcare in general. So that's so I think all in all, I'm impressed Bitcoin is at the price that it's at. But the my scene in crypto, broadly speaking, has been a disappointment.
I would counter the idea that centralization for information architecture in healthcare is where we're going. That's where it always has been, siloed and centralized and things like that. Now, what I've seen no less than 9 companies doing this, creating a decentralized architecture where they're installing something like a hypernode inside of the all of the different silos, and then indexing all the data with AI, and then being able to let a patient hit a single button, and suddenly you have all the data. One company uh, did about, I think it was 127 Apollo Hospital integrations. And they're using different systems that they had been trying to do for 3 years. They did it in like 2 weeks with this methodology. And if I told you I'm tripping over companies that can do what HIEs were trying to do for years, it would not be untrue. You're seeing them all the time. And just the things that people can do now, like that one, how many times have you seen patient portals come and go, right? Now I'm walking down the street, downtown New York City, and people are talking about their MyChart, right? And granted, it became a de facto standard due to the market penetration of the company that made it. But it's become a common, easy thing for everybody to do. And I think that's going to get even better as you start to get these fetching systems that will centralize it on the patient and take away the market control of the existing hospital systems. Where they say, oh, I'm never going to not go to this hospital system because my data is over at the other hospital system. So I think you're going to see a deconstruction of that centralized siloed architecture. And I think we're seeing it now.
Interesting. Thanks. Yeah. So the next is perhaps one of the more interesting stock market and economy trends I've seen is there's a growing discussion online of what I'll call a Gen AI bubble. So what the bubble is that the so-called Magnificent Seven, these are the biggest tech stocks that have also seen the biggest appreciation since the start of COVID and continuing today. But the Magnificent Seven, they all have AI stories and they all have seen significant stock market lift because of their AI stories. Meanwhile, the rest of the stock market has not been doing well. So we're watching the NASDAQ rise, the S&P 500 rise. That's because of these giant companies and their stocks going up, but not the average. The average company is not seeing its earnings go up and is not seeing its stock price go up. But with the Magnificent Seven and the stock market lift, it's all based on huge spending today on the promise of profitable revenue tomorrow, but it has not delivered on the promise, and that's the bubble. The bubble is that stock prices are up based on the promise of the future. And so we didn't hear talk of a Gen AI bubble a year ago or 6 months ago, but people are increasingly talking about this, and that story could lead to a kind of a pulling in of the stocks of the Magnificent Seven. So any thought, are we, so I guess, Alex, first of all, are we going through a Gen AI bubble?
The fun part of this, I'm sorry, what's Steve?
Are we going through a Gen AI bubble right now, and will we see a pull in later?
I see this as you and I are on opposite ends of a telescope. So if I could hold a telescope between us, you'd have the big end, I'd have the little end. No, you'd have the little end, I'd have the big end, right? So you're looking far, okay, over the horizon and sort of looking in the public markets, okay, at the big companies and what's going on with them. I'm looking through the other end and it's more of a microscope and looking at these tiny little companies that are just ideas sometimes. So in a sense, I'm 3 or 4 years ahead of you. I mean, when last time I was on stage at HIMSS, I'm on stage with a bunch of, multi-billion-dollar fund managers, and they're talking about maybe getting into digital therapeutics someday. And we had invested in our first digital therapeutic like 6 years before. So we see something different, but it's harder at this end because you can't just pick out the big ship on the horizon. You have to figure out which of the microbes are going to turn into a big ship. Mixing my metaphors a little bit, but you get the idea. What's going to grow into a whale? Okay, I guess I should stick with organics. So I'm looking at the plankton, you're looking at the whales. I can't really comment that much on the things that you're talking about because it's not my business, right? I mean, yes, those are the companies that we work with that are looking for the early stage companies to work, to find. So the Amazons of the world are running accelerators. CMS is running accelerators. Uh, and I think that's very good for my early stage companies. That's why we're planning on getting into 130 new companies, because I think the idea now is that there's going to be winners. It's going to be very hard to pick out which are going to be the winners. So I'm talking about my side of the business, mostly because I don't know your side of the business as well as you do. I don't actually like playing in public markets because I feel like there's so many really smart analysts like you out there who are just reading those tea leaves every day. And there's a lot of things that are going on that lay people, even small VCs like me, we'll never know. you know, yes, I could, pick out this one versus that one, but I tend to stay in my lane, stick to my knitting, whatever metaphor you like, and work with the early stage companies. And we have a good system that validates them. We don't call it crowdfunding anymore, even though there is funding involved. It's more crowd validation, because that's an important step in our process. It also makes it much more efficient. I talk to other VCs, and they'll do 4 investment committees a day, so 800 a year or so. My brain would explode, and that's just so much work, so much effort. So if we filter down from 300 companies down to 5 companies, do due diligence on them, it's a shit ton less work, and it's got very good predictive value. And P values, there's all kinds of statistical, models. P values basically correlate, try to figure out if there's actually, anything real there. So if your P value is less than 0.1, it's probably real. So the P value on the predictive value of our contest is something like 0.05. So it's worked out pretty well. Okay, here we go talking about me again.
Great. Wait, thanks. So Tom in our audience asks a question about centralization and decentralization. He asks, do you see AI, LLM AI, as a future distributed resource, particularly open source, where any shop can produce a point solution they need or want to sell? That's a really good question. And I think what we're seeing right now is an undoing of a prior assumption. So the thinking was it is so hard to get a large database of data for yourself. It's so hard to run training on it, and it's so hard to set up and run a server farm to serve AI answers to consumers that only a few of the large language model builders will be able to exist, and supported by only a few hyperscalers. And that in turn is the industry's moat. The industry needs some kind of protection, some kind of moat, and that's its moat. And it's going to be like having Boeing and Airbus, and almost nobody else can play this game. And that's not what we're seeing.
I almost wholeheartedly disagree with you there, Stephen.
That is the setup that we've had for 2 years. But in the last 6 months to a year, we've seen the undoing of this story. And so,
Exactly.
Especially with the Chinese model DeepSeek, which was done where they did not have trouble gathering data. They may have scraped data that they shouldn't have. They did not have trouble training the model, and they did not have trouble setting up a server farm for the model, although it was swamped with use and went offline due to excessive use.
They did have trouble setting up EULAs and privacy statements. I don't know if you tried to use it, but if you click on their EULAs and privacy statements, it 404'd. 404'd meaning that there was nothing there.
So that suggests that we'll see many AI models in the future, including ones that might be good enough that run on your PC with no server backend. And that in turn means that investors are struggling to figure out what's the moat here. I'm going to put all this capital to work building something, and I'm going to have a business, and then there's no moat for that business.
The moat's the data. I mean, so if you think about the way Tesla did optical-based driving, right? They got it out there as quickly as they could, never as quickly as Elon would say it was going to happen. But they started collecting visual data and creating the models. So they have a huge advantage in terms of autonomous driving when it came to collecting the data. So having the large data model, and Konsadiki is doing the same thing now with radiology data, right? It's whoever has the most data wins. And whoever has the data collection model that is the most attractive and is the most functional and is the most fun to do. I remember when my co-founder of MedStartr, Thor Ernstson, Now, he didn't wind up being a co-founder because, well, there's a lot of stories there, but he was with us in the very beginning. He was in the ideation phase about a week before we launched, but he had created a data collection model for the company he was working for at the time. And he collected an enormous amount of data from patients about their entire medical situation, things they wouldn't even tell their mother, right? And on average, people were answering like 42 questions. Why? They were doing it because it was fun, because it was a good experience. This is a guy who had designed Farmville, which was the even more successful sequel to Pioneerville on Facebook, if you remember the Zynga games. And he really got into getting into healthcare data. And that was the first thing he did in healthcare. And it was, if you remember CareVerge, it was extremely addictive. And having an addictive way that people engage with and provide data, that if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty of who's going to have a moat, it's going to be who makes, the best design that keeps people engaged. So they say software eats the world. No, it's not software. It's design.
Thanks.
And coming from somebody who's got a very ugly website, clearly I'm not following my own rules. But wait till the next one.
So shifting on to business and trade journal news. So for our audience, feel free to throw any business journal and business and trade journal stories in the chat for us to remark on. But so I came across a story I was interested in was that San Francisco-based Arintra, which is an autonomous medical coding platform, announced it had raised a $21 million Series A funding round led by Peak 15 Advisors with additional investment by Y Combinator and other funds. So they handle the process from autonomous medical coding, from chart review to claim submission. Their CEO, Nitesh Shroff, and their lead investor, Mohit Bhatnagar from Peak 15. Other competitors in that space is Boston champion Codometrics and Nim Health. So this is part of a trend. It's a continuation of a trend where companies addressing what's being called administrative or revenue cycle management on the provider side are winning a lot of venture investment and seem to be delivering a lot of results as products. We're talking about direct to bill going, increasing from 25% to 50% or higher, which is a great savings to a hospital for things like this. And of course, people have been following a bridge, which has raised giant amounts of money at huge valuations out of Pittsburgh for doing similar things in scribing. That's also administrative duty there. So two things I noticed is this is a continuation of that trend, but also that the investors, Peak 15 partners, I don't see their name commonly with digital health. So that means that digital health mainstream investors missed this deal. And Y Combinator, they don't do a lot in digital health, but this is one of their digital health companies. And so it's a continuation of this trend of investing in Gen AI for administrative processes, workflow automation, red tape reduction. And it's also, it's another deal that mainstream digital health investors missed and did not invest in. And we're seeing a lot of that where CEOs have to go to other kinds of investors because they're not getting the funding from digital health investors. So any thoughts on this particular deal, Alex?
Well, I mean, those companies and that particular space was very ripe for disruption and innovation. My first company was actually an expert system that did RCM using tons of things that were available in the 90s and very early data warehouses, decision support systems. But it doubled our collection rate for 1,000 doctors under management just by attacking every single different reason. Think about it, like insurance companies for years have had a huge head start in coming up with creative ways to deny paying for claims, right? I think we had 157 different types of denials that we worked on. And for my original software was for letters of medical necessity, which basically we take the clinical care plan and analyze it and check it against literature and produce a report. We didn't lose a case for like 2 years. Okay, so it completely changed the game. And I talked to other CIOs at PPMs. We had all been doing the same thing. But then the entire PPM model got exploded, not in a good way. And there really hasn't been a replacement for it. There's been claim scrubbers, obviously all sorts of EDI solutions, but it was time for this to exist because an AI could do what we built in a couple of weeks, probably in a couple of minutes, and each case being different. So, and if you make a system built on that, That's a really smart idea. I do worry about non-healthcare investors investing in healthcare. It's a very complicated system. There's a lot of misaligned incentives. So I mean, to me, it's not a positive thing. The third aspect that I wanted to comment on, I seem to have forgotten it. Couldn't have
The
been that
joke
important.
I'm hearing about all this spend on autonomous medical coding is that hospitals are spending up on AI to optimize billing, and payers are spending up on AI to optimize denials.
Exactly. You have mutually assured denials
And
instead of destruction.
the next thing is that they use up all the world's compute, and finally they use up all the world's electricity. But the actual billing doesn't change that much. The actual funds that back and forth doesn't.
It is a war. I mean, so the other thing was boring companies, not Elon Musk's boring company, but the things that do the boring things of healthcare. So not the new cancer treatment that makes tumor size reduced by 92% in 3 weeks. That's the sexy stuff, right? Well, for us, as a former pathology PhD candidate, didn't finish, but that is pretty exciting to me. But more invested in a medical clothing company that makes gowns that are awesome. I use one as a bathrobe. They're actually great. Um, Staffing company that uses AI to match locum tenens. About 2% of all of your staff in hospitals are temporary, and traditionally it costs a lot more to go through that. So it wasn't good for the doctor. It wasn't good for the hospital. So these guys cut that in half because they're using a lot of automated systems. A roll up of health coaches. That's Eugene Brockovich and Marina Brockovich's company, Your Coach Health. They're making inroads. They're getting large self-insured employer contracts where all the employees can now get, and these are very boring businesses in a way. No offense, Eugene, if you're watching. But it's the nuts and bolts, right? And even something like telemental health, like another one of our companies, Valera. How many of my companies can I mention in one call? So, it's just therapy. Calls like this. Telemental health. Got huge, but now it's kind of like de facto standard. It's what people expect. Something care that's convenient, where you want it, when you want it. Get to pick your own doctors, and they could be in, Tuscaloosa for all you know.
So skipping on to another section of the show, this is a crowd favorite for the show. What is a technology that has improved your life that our audience could hear about and benefit from? And so I thought I'd throw in here that I had a friend who was very concerned after the Spain blackout, was very concerned about blackouts. And so I got my friend a product. It was called a Flex Solar 60-watt solar panel. It's a flexible solar panel. And what was special about this one is that its output is not some obscure sort of DC plug. Its output was USB-C, PD 3.0. That's advanced USB-C. And so you literally just plug a USB-C cable into your solar panel, and then the other end goes into your phone, and you charge your phone. And so then my friend had a blackout, and she used it.
I have one right here on my backpack. A giant solar panel. You can't see it, but yeah, and it goes right to a USB-C.
Very cool. So that step that cuts out, sometimes there's these complicated plugs, barrel plugs that you don't know, you don't have anything to plug them into. But the new generation is going straight to USB-C, which I like, and they're cheaper and they're flexible. So you could put them, you don't have to worry about breaking glass.
And they don't have that. So I don't know if you know this, but lightning cables have a chip in them that makes them on a random basis die. So when I had lightning cables, I probably had 50 of them over the course of 6 years, right? But USB-C, they don't have that. So there's no planned obsolescence built into it. And you're going to see that with a lot of things. Like, so for example, your Freestyle Libres and even the Stello, which is Dexcom's consumer product, they'll last longer. Okay. There's no reason for this planned obsolescence thing. And then companies like our Allergy company, it never needs to have a needle and it never needs to be changed. So technology should be advancing in these ways. So, so other than products from our own companies, which I think are, this one in particular is incredible. It's diagnostics on your own, real time for anything. Okay. We started out trying to figure out glucose and we kind of overshot. A couple of days later, we figured out how to do insulin or the fat or the fat totem for insulin, which is CRP, and then alcohol. That was kind of a fun one to figure out because we used the breathalyzer to train the model. But once we figured out the algorithm for anything, we found that we could see anything in real time using radio frequency and just a really good antenna. So that company's doing great. But that's the most exciting thing, but it's not in the market yet. I mean, I wear them all the time, just because I'm, the corporate guinea pig, but, and, one of the bigger investors. But my favorite thing, I can actually demonstrate. Alexa, turn on the chill. Okay. And we've got noise and we've got air conditioning. Everything in my home, is automated. And I know that that's not really that innovative. People have been doing this for years, but once you implement either the Philips or the Wise, Alexa, turn off the chill. Anyway, so sorry, it's a little loud. But once you integrate it with everything, locks, lights, all sorts of electrical, anything with electricity. When I go on the road, and I was on the road 105 of the first 111 days this year. So I spent a lot of time in hotels. One of the first things that I missed from home was being able that I had to actually go look for a thermostat or light switches or anything like that. As you can see, I'm always using my hands, not necessarily to go find a light switch. So that's, to me, it's this, tech that is in our lives. And I know it's not that exciting.
That's really cool. It's growing more and more capable every year. And I spent some time with a family recently where their two young daughters were very accustomed to calling on, Google to play music or play stories for them. And it was just as natural as anything for them to just call out, play Taylor Swift or something like that. So,
yeah, who needs people anymore?
Well, great. So the next section of the show, and Bart has asked us a question about getting in touch with us. And yes, Bart, I think we can both be in touch with you. So the next section is upcoming conferences. So this is a part of the show where we talk about upcoming conferences and whether they're worth going to, and maybe even a mini review of a conference. And so I'll just mention that I'm speaking at an upcoming conference, August 20th in Boston. It's called the AI for Healthcare and Pharma Conference in Boston. And I'll be on a panel speaking about the fundraising environment. Email me and I'll send you a link to this conference if you're interested in going. That's next week, Wednesday. And then, Alex, you and I are producing an event, Longevity Tech Night in New York on September 24th, Wednesday, September 24th in New York. Again, for our audience, you can email me and I'll send you a link to the event. But we're going to be talking about the hot trend of software and tech companies making products for the longevity market at that event. And then the big one that on everyone's mind is the health conference in Las Vegas. That's going to be October 20th. And this is an investor conference. And a lot of people go here as their big conference of the year or in preference to JP Morgan. And it'll be interesting to see. I think we're going to see fewer attendees this year for a number of reasons. A lot of the momentum comes from venture funds. Venture funds in digital health are in trouble. And a lot of the momentum comes from young companies running out of money. And then also there's new management. And I think the prior management was led by John Weiner, and he knew how to shake his hips and hustle and make it exciting. And it was unknown yet whether the new management can do that. So anyway.
Well, I spoke to the guy who ran it then and is running it now, just for the other day. They're pretty much following to plan, and it sounds like their registrations are pretty strong. So, but I don't really think of it as an investor conference. We're actually talking to them about working on that, and they've been very innovative. And we worked with them on that a lot. So the way that they always do all of the content on the corners and in the middle of the showroom floor. That came from the Vive conference in 2022, where, we attracted, a third of the conference to our Good Vivations crowd challenge pitch contest. And it emptied out the rooms. So they said, okay, we're not going to fight that. We're going to now put all of the stages out there on the floor so people can float between this and that and go to whatever attracts them. And it's always going to feel like it's full, out on the floor, as opposed to in some closed room upstairs at the MBCC, which is where that was, the Miami Beach Conference Center. But there's a lot of great conferences. HLTH, I always saw it as sort of like the replacement for Health 2.0, but a lot flashier. And they've lived up to that. both their Vive and their HLTH conferences. Extremely well produced, a lot of excitement. Everybody loves the industry nights, right? Um, but not a huge investor conference in my view. So we might work with them to bring an investor network in. That's what we've been doing the last 6 months, or the last 10 events, or almost all investor events, sort of deciding that was where we needed to build our community next, especially as, we're looking for more capital to deploy. So, and we're also looking for investors, not just any investors, ones that want health impact capitalism, not philanthropy, impact capitalism, to do well and to do good.
Any other conferences coming up in the fall that you're excited about or want to go to?
I mean, we're probably going to end our next crowd challenge at HLTH, so that's the one that I'm thinking of most. We run our own events a lot. So, like I said, we run 10 so far this year. We got 3 more on the books for August 25th and October 2nd at Microsoft. So, and we've done our own conferences as well. I don't particularly like running conferences. It's a lot of effort for what we love to do. I mean, we just want a large stage, which is a large audience, to put our companies in front of and find out what the crowd thinks about those ideas. And everybody gets questioned about, not questioned, but the applications and forms, whatever they want, ways to vote in the contest. So the crowd knows better than any individual is the concept. And this is very Malcolm Gladwell tipping point type stuff. But I'm boring you, Steve. What's the next topic?
Well, great. So the last before we get to the second half of our show is personal notices. So here's where we talk about just things we're doing, ways that the audience can interact with us. And so I'll mention that you and I are doing a longevity tech night. I mentioned this before on Wednesday, September 24th in New York. So for our New York audience, this is a great time for you to come. It's a really hot topic, really interesting area. And this is about the tech companies that are building products in digital health. And this has become an unexpectedly a very hot area the last 2 years. People are saying we're going through a singularity right now in longevity biotech and longevity tech, which is the software part of it, with fundraising by companies like Superpower and Function Health and others. So really interesting time to do an event focusing on that. And then I'll also mention for our Boston audience, I am hosting a Boston Health Innovation Night tomorrow, Thursday, August 14th at the Liberty Hotel. Guest of honor is Brian Anderson, the CEO of the Coalition for Health AI, and he's going to talk about what to expect in healthcare over the next 2 years from the impact of generative AI. So that's an event to convene Boston members of the health innovation community to talk about what's going on in healthcare. And for both of those, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to send you the links to those. Alex, any personal notices for our audience, ways for them to catch you on TV or at events or whatever?
Isn't the Liberty the one that used to be a prison?
Yes.
The place is really cool.
One of the
sounds
bars,
like a really great agenda.
One of the bars is called the Clink, and the other bar is called the Alibi.
I've spent time at both. So so wonderful venue. And it sounds like a great event. Oh, how to find me? I'm Alex B. Fair everywhere. So it's like a sentence, Alex B. Fair, right? Or MedStartr. And there's no second D in MedStartr. Maybe we should buy one of these days. MedStartr.com. If you want to come to our funds, it's MedStartr.vc. If you want to come to our New York City community, it's MedStartr.nyc. If you want to go to the Boston community that we just started for Steve, it's MedStartr.com/Boston. Okay, very simple. We launched our first crowdfunding campaign for ourselves since 2017. So it's been a long time since I used my own system. And it is, like eating your own dog food and This is the existing MedStartr.com site, not the next one we're building, which we're already building, and it's really fucking cool. But we figured we should clean up the old site. We mothballed it back in 2022 after a number of things that happened. So we're running a huge national crowd challenge now. We're going to invest in some of the winners. So there's companies forming up right now. We just put our campaign on. So if you go to MedStartr.com on the homepage, you go to new projects, you'll see the MedStartr campaign right there. And then you can listen to 22 minutes of me talking about how the whole model works and how you can get involved and things that we could help do with you. We've set up health tech pilot program. We set up the healthcare innovators. We consulted for Enterprise Ireland. We worked with Oshner, Blue Cross Blue Shield, 160 different partners. the AMA, the AHA to run innovation programs that worked really well. So, and that's part of the model, right? Because if we run a contest, just us saying, hey, we're going to invest in the winner, it gets a good amount of traction. But if we do it with Ochsner Health Systems and they say, hey, we're going to do a pilot with the winner, that's also attractive, right? And so even when we designed the health tech pilot program for Mike Bloomberg in New York back in 2011, I think, and, they said, how do we increase digital health tech investing in New York City? And so I said, just make the pilots, very easy to do. De-risk it for both sides. Make sure that the startup actually gets paid something, right? Because back then, death by pilot was much more common. And it kind of changed the game. It brought hospitals to the table for running healthcare innovation programs. And now hospital innovation programs are some of the best. I mean, the Cedars-Sinai program, what Razu Shrita is doing, UPMC has always been amazing. So yeah, anyway, so I'm pretty easy to find. Alex Be Fair everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. So, and thanks for giving people a real email address that reaches you. So I heard a joke recently, which was 10 years ago, people used to say, write me at my email address. And then 5 years ago, people would say, follow me at twitter.com because they didn't have time to read your email. And then most recently, people are concluding their talks by saying, and here's a link, talk to my GenAI avatar. But I think email is still the most useful of those. So
you laugh, but I have one of those. I trained to write like me, talk like me, think like me. And it's really obnoxious. It's really not that fun to be around. So I don't know if you want that mirror. When my mother, this is a little sad, but it's also funny. So when my mother was dying, I said, Mom, can I make a Gen AI model of you? And she asked me what it was. And I explained it to her. And she said, no, well, that wouldn't be me. I said, well, we're always evolving. I mean, this should just be Ellen Jane, 6.0. And she laughed. And I said, but Mom, you can tell me you don't like my girlfriend or not to vape or smoke forever. Still laughed, still said no. But yeah, so we should all have Gen AI models of ourselves, available to exist after we're here. That's the real longevity. Get the upload, get the Gen AI model built. And there's a lot of good companies for this now. There's one that people say is my lookalike, Pitbull, invested in that we saw at the Emerge conference, which incidentally, the Emerge Americas conference down in Miami last year is one that's coming up. It's actually, I believe my friend is got the contract to run the conference. So we'll probably be doing something there. But really just great content, really well managed, not that big, but we saw some really great companies there. Not exactly just health tech, probably go 30%.
That's great. Thanks. So now we're moving on to the second half of the show, which is our main topic, which is fundraising with crowd challenges and pitch competitions. Digital health fundraising is tough as business uncertainty grows and VCs retrench. But buoyed by positive regulatory shifts and new technologies, crowdfunding and competitions are emerging as a new way for innovators to win visibility, validation, and funding for their companies. So can you tell us what is going on with early stage fundraising in general? And then how are crowd challenges and pitch competitions being seen by other investors and also by entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Did I rate that content? Because I don't think I would have said that it's a new thing. I know that we were workshopping it together. But yeah, I mean, crowd competitions have been around since we started them back in 2012, the end of 2012. And we've run like 60 of them ourselves. When you talk when you look out around, there are tons of crowd validation. Looks like I'm frozen. Am I still here? Okay.
Yes.
My hands were staying in the same place for more than milliseconds. So I was a little worried. So, but yeah, I mean, you've got CMS running in an accelerator and looking for innovations. When they put out their RFI for a healthcare innovation ecosystem, they got hundreds and hundreds of responses, and really interesting projects. I know because we ran all of the responses through our AI and had it come up with the one ring that binds them all kind of approach, which is our goal, right? I mean, we're a platform, and the more innovators are on the platform, the more useful it is to everybody. We always say that people are going to connect, collaborate, and create the future of healthcare together. And I'm not saying startups should always collaborate with other startups, but if you have all the hospital systems, there looking for ideas, then that's very useful. So the great thing about a crowd challenge or any kind of contest like that is it aggregates interest, right? It aggregates all the attention to one spot. One of my favorite ones of all time was the Triple D challenge that Sarah Hollebuck ran from her company. And this is a long time ago, before we even started doing challenges. And it was just a super well-designed contest. And it did include some level of crowd validation, right? So if you package it all up, you get a lot of attention, come up with a catchy name, and have great sponsors, you're going to get this aggregation of interest all around, one focal point. And whether that's on a, new site that somebody sets up, like we did for the AMA back in 2016. I mean, we got 500,000 visits to that site in 5 weeks. And we had just set it up literally hours before the challenge launched. So there's a lot of great things going on. If you see our newsletter, if you go to any of the MedStartr sites, they'll sign up for the newsletter. We send out all the ones that come across our bow, because we like to make sure everybody has all the news about challenges and contests like that. I don't think it's accelerating right now. I think there's some bigger players at play, right? So I think CMS is looking for real innovations to implement into CMS, and that's 56% of all healthcare costs, right? They have a mandate to reduce the cost of care, and there's a lot of things that can be done. Now, I don't agree with everything that's been done, in the current administration for healthcare system. I mean, there's things in the big beautiful bill that are really scary. The vaccine stuff, I can't really say anything nice about that. But I will say that 4 of our MedStartr mentors, so we have about 1,200 MedStartr mentors, real experts like yourself, Steve, that we call upon to look at ideas and projects. But 4 of them now work, in USDS, which is what DOGE really is. It's US Digital Service. But so that gives me a lot of hope that they'll be bringing in new ideas at scale, and that will really change the care paradigm in a lot of ways. And sometimes, the concept of creative destruction. Okay, so we've had some destruction, but now it's time for some creation, right? And I think that does give you much more potential to drive really lasting, significant change.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so I've been intrigued to see that the team behind the X Prize, a lot of people will remember the X Prize as those people who organized commercial trips into space and won enormous amounts of media attention and validation for the competing companies, and caused the competing companies to spend far more on each on getting into space than the prize was worth. So the act of putting out a prize, did media attention that was helpful for the companies, and also catalyzed their raising and spending money on developing space travel that was greater than the size of the prize. So they have now launched a Health Span X Prize, very interesting. And there have been dozens of companies that are participating. And they have a prize of $101 million for people who win certain milestones along the way. And they're looking to try to create medicines that reduce the chances of chronic age-related diseases and push out human health span into the future. Really interesting, but that's using a powerful prize technique to motivate the companies to pursue the goal and also to help those companies raise money themselves.
Yeah, I mean, X Prizes, they've been pioneers in this space long before I started doing it. And they've been really changing a lot. I know a couple of those guys over there, and I love what they're doing. I hadn't heard that it costs more to win the contest than you actually win the contest. That's an interesting fact. Since our early contests were all judged based upon how much money they raised on the site, we actually had seen that some people would be throwing money into their campaigns or getting their hands too. And so that's why we created all these like honesty metrics to make sure and look at the social graph of all the people who are actually contributing. But so just you have to be very careful with such contests to avoid chicanery of all sorts.
So Alex, you live at the early stage of health innovation in New York. How does the fundraising environment today compare with the recent past? What are some trends you're seeing? And what are some options for executives on this call who are looking to fundraise?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Obviously a lot of capital dried up, in 2023 and 2024 with the the death of a lot of the darlings of digital health, right? What I think was the post-COVID downturn, right? For one, because we saw a ton of investment and a ton of innovation adoption during COVID because we needed to. But then as soon as it was over, a lot of companies, especially telehealth companies and things like that, got killed, right? So we had one company that went from 6 telehealth visits in 2020 in June to over 25,000 a month 13 months later, right? But of course, that dropped off as soon as people could leave their homes again, right? So that's just one typical example. They've and just like anytime when you're in a very rapidly growing company, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have been in those, you really got to watch controlling costs, right? You really got to get disciplined, right? But you don't have time for that when you're doing acquisitions or going X on your volume, right? You're just doing it as best as you can, as fast as you can. So those companies have had to do belt tightening and restructuring and just act like grown-ups, right? So anyway, so the companies themselves have gone through a lot. The new companies, which I think are innovating a lot faster, growing their innovation stack, faster because you can build faster, you can figure out what to do faster, you can get crowd validated faster, you can find out a lot faster. But can you get funded faster? Well, capital has to catch up, right? So you've seen less deals, right? Volume starting to increase again. Size of the deals are a little bigger, but it's less deals, right? So, a lot of VCs aren't operating anymore, right? Or they're being very conservative. This is why I think, now is the time to start doing more crowd validation so people can be more confident that there's a market for an idea, that there are customers lining up, wanting to do pilots, wanting to do partnerships, want to try things out, want to start the investor conversations. So I mean, that's what our platform is built for, not just to raise money, but to drive awareness, to get PR, and to start the conversations, right? And the events as well. So the reason we've done so many investor events is to bring investors back into the fold and get into investing in healthcare innovation again. And, it's going well.
That's interesting. When I think about the recent past of fundraising at the early stage of innovation in healthcare, there was a tremendous boom through 2020 and 2021, and then there was a bust hangover in 2022, 3, 4. And coming into 2015, investors were optimistic that things would get better soon.
I mean,
coming into 2025, investors were optimistic that things would get better soon, as long as the overall macro climate got better. The hangover was working itself out, and there'd be new funds available. And what we run into instead, it seems like, is what I'm calling the Trump pause. And so this is in the April, May, June, July, August timeframe. Due to tariffs and other issues, there's been a kind of a further pause by investors. And what's happening with the pause is it starts with big corporate buyers of software, so pharma companies and hospitals and health plans, and they say, well, things are looking uncertain. I may have a smaller budget next year than this year. I'm going to put a pause on buying enterprise software. And then who's watching that carefully is VCs, who have the luxury of pausing. And so they say, well, we want to see which way the heads of the buyers of capital equipment at pharma are going. And so we're going to sit back and pause. And then CEOs of young companies see this as well. They usually can't pause. A pause is bad news for them. And so this seems to be, an unexpected problem on top of prior problems in the fundraising environment. But within that, it seems like validation through crowd competitions, is something that isn't necessarily affected by this Trump pause, and that where things are still working, where you can get in touch with investors who are still investing, where you can get proof points that might be paused in other environments. Would you agree with my characterization? And do you think things are that the pause is over now, maybe, and we're going to start seeing some more? Or what do you think?
We shall see, Stephen. It's a very good question. Anytime there's higher risk, you need to find ways to mitigate the risk, right? So in this particular case, with fear, uncertainty, and doubt generated to some extent by the tariffs and the uncertainty of our civil society, et cetera, and obviously aspects of the big, beautiful bill are definitely going to have huge effects on healthcare. People are probably wise to look a little bit more carefully. Don't just follow the crowd, which I do think you do see a lot of that. If you have a second-time AI founder, and they talk about some sort of foundation model, they're going to get $100 million, right? So that's where you're seeing like, huge investments, in AI nurse, foundation model or something like that. We've seen a bunch of those, right? You noted one earlier, but I think a safe approach is to go and see where the market goes and get the enthusiasm going, right? Get the excitement for an idea and gather that critical mass around the idea, even if it's just the backroom approach of having, 15 reviewers. That's enough to really get valid data, we've found. We prefer getting 1 million people to look at things because all sorts of, amazing things happen when you get that level of healthcare, and it has to be healthcare people. When we get a story written about us in the Wall Street Journal, we'll get 0.01% of the site visitors actually engage with the startups. And when they do, it's mostly going to be lay people. Getting people who are in the healthcare innovation ecosystem engaged. So if we're written about in Med City News or in something like this, it's going to drive a lot more traffic. And that traffic will have a 4% engagement rate, which is pretty good, right? So, click-through rates versus actually clicking on something or actually putting money into an idea. So those are the metrics that we look at, in any project. So if a project gets 10,000 people to look at it and they get 100 people clicking on it, that's not even that good. If they get 1,000 people and they get 100 people looking at it, then that's amazing. Right. And that's one that we know that is pricking up the ears of the people listening. And don't forget the viral effect of being inspired. Right. So you see somebody doing something incredible, something you've not been able to see before, like the metaphor thing I was talking about before. That's the name of the company that puts in the hypernodes and, connects everything. You see somebody doing something like that that states in the country spend billions of dollars trying to do, and they can do it for $500,000 in a couple of weeks. That's a game changer. So the innovations are accelerating. And when we see those things, when you see the fitness tracker that's also doing EEGs that while you're running a marathon will tell you, if you know the Ed Marks story where he had a heart attack while he's running and he finished the marathon anyway. Ed Marks is amazing. And he did something amazing here. He kept running even after he had a heart attack. And apparently that's very common. So I saw a company yesterday, 2 days ago, that's doing that. They have fitness monitors that are going to be cardiac wellness monitors that through training, and they've got a really great engagement model for people training for marathons. And it starts there and makes a competition between them. Obviously, I like competitions, but you see these inspiring projects. You go back to corporate, you're hanging out at the water cooler, you say, "Hey, I saw this amazing thing," and then it inspires everybody to think that they can do something different. Right? That they don't have to accept the status quo. That you can start doing chronic care management, with the myriad tools that are available for that. And you can start adopting them. So I think one of the benefits of crowd validation, crowd challenges is getting into the minds of all of us who work in the healthcare system. And I was a hospital CIO, and worked in the system as a nurse's aide. And, it seems like it is static, right? It doesn't seem fluid. It doesn't seem like it's going to be changing that much. But I would say that the number one thing that happens, from people who come to our events and engage with the innovators, engage with each other. I always say that they connect, they collaborate, and they create, but mostly they hope, right? They believe that something could be different, because when you talk to other people who are like-minded and want to drive healthcare innovation impact, you can do a lot more together, than apart. There's a famous African saying that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring the tribe, right? So bring the tribe is important. I actually heard that from Steve Harvey first. So hilarious. But it's a truism, right? If you gather your crowd behind you during a crowd challenge, and the people running the challenge give you access to that data in real time, so you can engage with people as soon as they click, that makes all the difference. Because, as you know, immediate gratification or getting an immediate response as opposed to leaving it on unread, as the kids say, is a very different experience. And things happen, and that's good.
We have another question from Tom, who asks about the different techniques of crowdfunding and similar things. So I mentioned, the prize, the X prize, which was modeled on the Orteig Prize and the Longevity Prize. And the Orteig Prize was the prize held out for an aviator who could fly from New York to Paris, and that was Charles Lindbergh. And the Modern X Prize is modeled on those. What are some of the techniques? So he asks, do crowdfunding techniques fall into different buckets, such as microshares or other ones? What are some techniques like holding out a prize or using microshares or three more like that people should know about? And what do you think of them? Are there any that you endorse?
There's four that are generally accepted, right? There's donation based. So that's your GoFundMe type things where everybody's saying, just donate to me. There's rewards based where you're getting something. So, so on a MedStartr campaign, for example, right now, the one that's live on MedStartr.com, you can design a hospital innovation challenge, right? For the low price of $35,000. So you can actually get things, in that case, services. You can get t-shirts designed by Regina Holiday, which this is only the second time she's ever done that. And she's doing it for us for the second time. You can't buy a Regina Holiday original. She has to be inspired by you, and then she'll paint you the back of your suit jacket for conferences or whatever, which is a really great thing that's been around for a while. The third type is lending, and that's really not done very much anymore. So loans was very popular in India. It's not really legal in America anymore. And then the fourth type is equity crowdfunding, or Reg CF as they call it. So you can do a round on equity crowdfunding sites. I think the only one that's really doing well is WeFunder. Republic has done some good work, but we decided not to go down that road ourselves because making an investment decision isn't usually something somebody does directly from a website. It's a very hard decision, especially if you're throwing in $1 million or what have you. It's not the kind of thing you just go read a campaign and click, yes, I want to do that. Yes, people follow other people into deals. So syndication on something like AngelList or Angel Pro, whatever they're calling it, is a real thing. Because if Jason Calacanis is investing in it, then and his investment committee, or there's some overlap between our investment committees. So we hear news from them fairly often. So they follow each other, but they can also be following lemmings over a cliff, like with Theranos. So there's negative aspects of that. So anyway, so those are the four basic ones. The fifth one, which hasn't really gotten much attention and prevalence, is coin, crypto, DAO approaches, right? So I think this might have potential, especially in an environment like MedStartr, where if I am Eric Topol, right? Again, not Eric Topol, but Eric's on the site. So if Eric clicks on a project, that's like all the alarms go off, right? His credentialing. So we credential everybody who clicks and across 7 different rubrics. So we know who they are and what the value is when they click. If you are Brent Stackhouse running ventures at Mount Sinai and he clicks, also makes the bells go woo, woo, woo. It's not actually audible, but anyway, but it makes the algorithm go a little nuts. And so imagine then that you could have a coin, MedStartr coin or what have you. And this is an idea we're bandying about. I don't know if we should do it, but I would love to hear from the crowd what you guys think. That you would earn not just social credit for getting behind some great ideas, but you could also earn coin credits. And then those coins could be traded. They could be used for different things. So we've been modeling out, some ideas around that. But there should be some sort of credit for the people who get behind the ideas that win, is the way we're thinking. And our MedStartr mentors do get credit for that. They win shares in the investments, or they get hired by the startups after they work with them a little bit, or, consult with them. So, and of course, they get early access to the deals that we syndicate. And we've done that a few times and it's gone pretty well. So I don't know if I answered the question though. There are at least 5 types, and they all have their benefits. You can do 3 of the types on MedStartr presently. There is an invest button, but it's really just starting the process of investing. Meaning, it's got a KYC form, which is, as you know your customer, make sure that they're accredited investors, and then goes to our broker dealer, Young American Capital, that handles all of that. And Bruce Kaufman, I've worked with him, known him for like 30 years. And he's one of the co-founders of the venture fund side of the business, or GP. So yeah, there's a lot of rules you have to follow, and he makes sure we follow the rules. He's what we call the adult supervision, although he's only really a couple of years older than me. but he's got all the qualifications.
How has the regulatory environment changed? So I think it's become easier to declare yourself to be, a sophisticated investor. You mentioned that the loan-based crowdfunding has not flown well in America, and we have just had a major change in perspective on crypto, which is that the Biden administration was very negative on crypto, and the Trump administration is very positive on crypto. And so, what are some of over the last, call it, 5-6 years? What are some of the ways that regulation has shifted to advantage some of these or disadvantage others of these?
A couple of years, a couple of weeks. Something came down just the other day, right? Saying changing accredited investor qualifications. So everything is changing. I mean, Reg CF changed things a lot, but the Jobs Act originally also changed things. That's when loan-based or credit-based crowdfunding became impossible to do without running afoul of the government, at least in the States. But in places like India, microfinance is a huge thing. It's been around forever. And online, it just got automated. So it's going to keep changing. It's kind of hard to know where the ball's going to land. People like me who could build out those platforms or perhaps create a walled garden around it or partner with somebody who's going to do like what Indiegogo did with microventures. We've had those discussions. We've considered doing it. I kind of don't want to touch it until after, we see what's actually happening. And we might, do SPVs, with low accreditation requirements if that becomes legit. As it is, we go to accredited investors. So I mean, there's a lot of creative strategies that I've heard of. That's above my pay grade. I don't necessarily want to get into that. One of my favorite things, though, I've seen lately is taking a healthcare innovation investment fund and putting it on the NASDAQ. So that's a relatively new thing. I mean, it's been done before in different contexts, but it's a really interesting new way to invest in a basket of early stage securities that could have X, doubt it, but maybe 1 out of 15 or so, which is enough. So anyway, I can't speak to what's been happening with ours. Our stats aren't like that at all, but for obvious reasons. So.
Well, that's great. So for people who listen to this show, should they visit your site? And do you have some validation events and competitions coming up?
So yes, we're a couple of days from launching the National Crowd Challenge, which usually, they'll get somewhere between 100 and 400 companies applying. We actually make a very difficult application because our application asks every question that a hospital leader, a physician, a patient activist, an investor would ask. It's got a due diligence room, data room built into it, which is double opt-in only after accredited investor status has been established. And only then can they actually get to the investor information, things like term sheets and valuations and things like that, and pitch decks. And so there's a place in the back end where the issuer, the startup, can load up all that information, but nobody can see it unless they're approved. It's a relatively new thing that we put into the site. If you go to the MedStartr project there, you can get to our deal room there. So we're, like I said, eating our own dog food. We just launched it a few hours ago. And it's a soft launch. So this is the first time we're actually talking about it in public. So we're just banging on it, checking for typos and seeing how it works and getting our tight community. We have the broad community. We've got the mentor network. And then we've got about 102 different subgroups on WhatsApp that are talking all day long about AI and medicine. Guys like Harvey Castro are in there, clinical trials with Craig Lipset and his gang. We've got Owen Muir doing psych. I forget the name of that group. It's some sort of like psych innovations or something like that. But then there's also ones by different cities and different conferences. And there's the general salon where, 400 people, who are some of the top people in healthcare, are chatting all day long about the news and all the great stuff that's going on and some of the bad stuff. I wouldn't recommend going into the politics room because that gets a little messy in there. Oh, yeah.
That's great. Well, so anything else you want to summarize about validation challenges and crowdfunding and pitch competitions for our audience?
They're not an obvious thing that people say, hey, that's really what I want to do. Do I really want to go out in public with my stuff, right? Even I, am reserved in such things. It's the first time we've done one of these since 2017 because you never know what's going to happen, right? I'll tell you 2 things about that. Even if only 1,000 people see your new idea, Think about when you go to a conference. You go to a conference and you might talk to 200 people. You might actually have great conversations with maybe 30 people that you didn't know before, right? And that's only if you follow a good conference strategy, which is don't talk to the people you already know, right? I mean, that is our instinct, right? You talk to Steve because I see Steve at every conference and we talk, right? But you got to keep moving, right? You got to butterfly around and do that. Now imagine you could have 1,000 new people you don't know come in and see your video, read a little bit about you. And even if they don't like it, it's gotten into their head a little bit. Or they might send it to somebody that they might think might like it, right? So there's a virality to it that drives awareness that you're not going to get anywhere else. And if you do get traction, and I'll be honest, early traction usually comes with your insiders, people who already know you, right? So I go to my salon, I drop the link there. And if people have positive impression of me, then they will go and review the project, tell me where the typos are in this case, and any bugs that are still in the site, things like that. So, and then that gets you what they call it a generative cycle, where lots of little things lead to big things. So one person clicking like leads to another one. If you've ever seen that video at that festival where there's one guy dancing crazily on the hill, and then suddenly a second person starts dancing, and then suddenly the entire hill takes off. Or if you were at HLTH in 2022 after Ludacris's show, that dance floor just went nuts as soon as we started it. Yeah, because that happened. Yeah, people were dancing on the tables. It was crazy. So, yeah, if you get a little bit of traction, at least a little bit more traction, a little bit more traction. So in the case of one of our portfolio companies, one patient activist, MedStartr mentor, saw it, Tiffany Peterson, who has lupus, and the innovation was for lupus. It was a very early digital therapeutic by MedStartr called MindMe. And so she saw it. She brought it out to her tweet chat community, right? Which had 40,000 people coming to it. And then pretty soon, another person like her, lay lupus lady, Amanda Green, I think her name is, she saw it. And then she sent it to her community, and she told two friends, and she told two friends, and she told two friends, and so on and so on. And pretty soon they had 109 people had clicked on it. Out of like 10,000 people, I think it was about 13,000 people who had actually visited the project. And then they had 2 pilots and then 3 partnerships and $119,000 invested. There's a reason it was our third investment, because they got crowd validated, right? So that's the kind of thing that can happen, but it takes a lot of work, right? It's a non-trivial amount of work to do a crowdfunding project. So when people ask me, can I do it on 2 different sites, things like that, go to the one that has the people that are going to want your thing. So if you have a consumer product like Sunny Vu did with his Misfit wearables, we actually built his project for him and advised him to do the project on Indiegogo, because everybody would want a beautiful little Fitbit. And this is a long time ago. It was like 2013 or so. And he sold that company for $240 million, rumored, 15 months after raising $897,000 on our partner campaign over at Indiegogo. So depending on where your audience is, the people who actually care about it. So if you want hospital leaders, if you want people in big pharma, you want Eric Topol, you want Craig Lipset, you want these guys to see it. I know I mentioned those guys a lot, but people know their names. But if you want to see our crowd to see it, then come to us. If you want to just raise donations for medical treatment, go to GoFundMe. So, there's all different platforms for this. Crowdfunding has, I believe, lost its luster. On its own, MedStartr is just a crowdfunding site, is not as useful as it used to be. But when we do a challenge, it aggregates that attention and it brings people to it, and people talk about it, and it goes a little bit viral.
Well, thank you. That's a great summary of sort of the current state of things. Well, thank you, Alex, for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. It's always fun talking to you. And we are exact opposite ends of this spectrum. So it's one of the reasons I value you and your insights and your thoughts. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. And good luck at your event tomorrow at the Liberty. Don't get locked that cage.
Yep, my August innovation night is tomorrow on the topic of AI at the Liberty Hotel in Boston. Email me and I'll send you the link.
I would definitely be there, but I've got too much other stuff to do down here in New York. And if you're ever in New York City, look us up. We'll throw together a flash mob for you if we think that that's the right move. Our next event is on the 25th, also in New York, and it's investor focused. If you go to any of our sites, it'll pop up and ask you to get on the newsletter. Just fill out the form and we'll hear about it.
Great, thank you. So you've been listening to the Digital Health Investor Talk show with host Steve Wardell. You can call on Wardell Advisors when you're ready to look into growth, fundraising, and strategic alternatives. And thanks to our guest, Alex Fair, the managing partner of MedStartr Ventures. And we'll be publishing this show in the Digital Health Investor Talk series on Apple and Spotify. Thanks, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for watching.